not that you, Cate Blanchett, are not fused to the character of Lydia Tarr, not at all, but your approach to letting us understand her fragility and her strength simultaneously is really amazing. And I wonder, like, how conscious and deliberate all that is. I'm assuming probably a great deal, but, and just to explain a little more, maybe what I mean is that I don't believe that she really knows who she is anymore, because she's had to make so many sacrifices. I mean, she says you have to sublimate yourself and immolate yourself even to be a conductor at that level. And for people who don't know, like the Berlin Philharmonic does not have a female conductor.
No, it's a fairy tale. It is still, unfortunately, a fairy tale.
Well,
yeah.
but it's, I guess I just am saying that in order for her to arrive at that, there's so much sacrifice, and for her to occupy a role where an entire orchestra is looking at her as an authority figure, and for her to have to adopt this role of authority, it seems quite alienating for her. And so when I look at her in the film, I think that you've developed some manner of occupying this space, of her being both very forceful, very confident, and also dislocated.
Well, the conductors that I spoke to and observed talked about, an extreme sense of nerves, and I know that inherently from having years and years and years working on the stage, is that I stand off stage, as I did before I came on here. The worst role you can possibly play is yourself. I would much rather play Lotte Cotter or Hedda Gabler. Coming on, it's much easier than playing Cate Blanchett, whoever that is. But I've had this ability to turn extreme anxiety into excitement, and that when you stand on the podium, particularly as a woman, that you know that you have to plant yourself there and you have to lead, and that true great leadership involves an enormous amount of fear and doubt and uncertainty, but and the ability to say, I don't know yet, and have questions. But all of those things we think about as being slightly feminine. But yet the canon, the grand tradition into which this character is stepping into, is entirely male and patriarchal, which means you have to plant yourself on the podium, and you cannot entertain doubt, and it's your way or the highway. But the problem is that she's the right person at the wrong time, and that if you look back to von Karajan and Furtwängler and Gergiev and all those, and even Bernard Haitink, who is one of my all-time favourite conductors, is that they are from a tradition that was far more autocratic, but yet now orchestras democratically elect their conductors. So how can you create? It's a process film. I think as you've seen, you don't see the performance, you see the process of making something, and that process is indelicate and often impolite, and it's full of doubt. And I think that's the state that she is in personally, as well as professionally. And I mean, you couldn't have hoped for a better collaborator than Todd, because Todd is incredibly. I mean, it was one of the most assured, clear, don't need to change a syllable screenplays that I have ever read in my life. But yet, as a director, even though he'd written the screenplay, he had said, but hang on, you said this needs to happen. He said, oh, don't worry about that. The writer wrote that. Don't worry about that. We can throw that away. And he was so available to what Nina or Noemi or Sophie or I or whoever, Mark Strong, ideas that we threw up. He was very alive to what happened in the moment. And so I felt, in a way, it was much more akin to a theatre production than it was to a film rehearsal, because a film shoot, because often you can feel like you have to reach perfection, and perfection is totally unattainable. And I think that's what often happens in the making of a film, is that you try and get the perfect moment, and you realise that there are several processes that a film undergoes beyond what you get on the day. And the fact that I knew Todd was behind the camera, He was behind the screenplay. He was directing the thing. He was totally inside the edit, along with Monica Wheely, who has done all of Haneke's films. How blessed were we to have her? So you knew you were in great hands. But I always knew I was part of an ongoing, open-ended conversation.
What about her mannerisms that were either developed by you or you and Todd in collaboration? Like, breathing is a really important cue for classical musicians.
Totally, yeah.
But her breathing is very specific. I love it. And her posture is very specific, and her way of standing, especially or even when you see her from behind, the way her feet kind of angle out. And I was more aware of it on this viewing of the film because at the very end, before she goes out to conduct the monster orchestra, she does her right? Am I right? She does this very sharp intake of breath. And it's as if she's cueing herself and also the audience that she is bringing full game to the monster orchestra.
You mean
no?
stepping onto the podium?
Before she walks
leading...
out, I think she's in a hallway, and then she walks out onto the podium and starts to conduct them.
Yeah. I mean, it's very tricky. I know this from years on the stage, is that it's so... I don't want to sound too kind of wanky about it, but at its best, there's a shamanism that happens between the audience and what goes on stage. And a play is nothing. I'm not Grotowski. I'm not interested in Grotowski. This thing happening in a hermetically sealed environment. It doesn't mean a thing before the audience is part of it. And so when you step out, you don't know what's going to happen that night. But you're acutely aware of the fact that the person in row G, seat 17, has just opened a mint. Okay, never mind, we're going to... and then mobile phone light has gone on in the stalls over there. Okay, that's going to distract several people, and you've got to bring people in. Like, you're acutely aware of all of that. So you can develop a superstition around it. And I think that can overwhelm you. But I think Tar is full of superstitions. And Todd had written this amazing paragraph at the beginning of the screenplay, which of course he wanted to jettison, that the first time you find her, she's full of superstitions and tics that she has to move through before she can simply face an audience. And I think that's the thing that an audience doesn't see. They think about performers as being supremely confident channelers, and that performers are riddled with doubt, and that the supreme act of bravery is coming out and channeling the thing through them, not for themselves, but for you guys. I'm doing it for you guys. It's all for you. It has nothing to do with me and my vanity. Nothing at all. I really don't get anything out of it at all. But you know what I mean? Like it is. And so you think every night it's not going to happen tonight. And particularly in the classical music world, and that was the amazing thing about working with the Dresden Orchestra, standing up and conducting. And they hadn't, and because of the pandemic, they hadn't played the big works. Like, they were back together playing Mahler with us for this film. It was amazing, and I gave the downbeat, and they were out of sync. And I was so blessed that they were out of sync, because they all laughed, and I all laughed, and I said, we've got to make this thing together. Is you make the thing together. And sometimes it may not lift off, but that's the exciting, dangerous thing that we all have to risk, is it may not lift off. And I think that's the thing that people forget, is there's not some certainty that we know how to do this. Every single time you go on set, every single time you step on stage, every time you step on the podium in front of an orchestra, it may be okay, because of course all of those orchestral players are at the top of their game, but it may not be the best they can do. And so I think that's where the superstition lies, and that's where the tics and the insecurities and the doubts reside.
Was it fun to conduct an orchestra?
Fun?
I mean, in moments, or was it always, or to play a conductor, did you ever kind of, I don't know, were you ever released into it, or were you constantly aware of counting and not wanting to?
Well, Todd has this really beguiling thing that he does, where I said to him, look, Todd, I'm really slow, so if we could spend the first week of me, just doing long shots, wide shots, where I walk past the camera, waving at people, I don't have to speak for a couple of weeks, that'd be great. And he said, yeah, absolutely, of course. And then a week before we started shooting, he said, here's the thing. And so whenever he says, here's the thing, I know that he's got some bad news to depart. Here's the thing. We have to do all of the conducting first. And so we had to step in Nina, who obviously had to learn to play that incredibly difficult parts of Mahler, and Sophie Krauer is obviously an amazing cellist, but had never played with an orchestra as big as the Dresden Orchestra. We had to jump in. But in the end, it's a blessing, because I had to plant myself on that podium and speaking to a lot of conductors, a lot of female conductors, who are absolutely at the top of their game. When they step on the podium, 70% is a political act. And they have to spend 70% of their energy pushing aside the fact that they're female, simply so they can be musicians. And I was an actress. I was like, boop, boop. So it's like I had to spend 99% of my energy saying, I'm rehearsing here with you guys. You're not actors. I'm not a conductor, but we have to make music together. And we found our way, and we were so blessed to work with them. And actually, ultimately, I mean, every conductor has a. This is obviously, you've seen the film, so it's not a film about conducting. It's so much more than that. But it's finding her physical language through the thing that she does was incredibly helpful.
I think she's really a character for the ages. And there's I think there's a line in it about victim and perpetrator, and I thought, well,
from her mentor, yes.
Yeah, from Andres, and that's absolutely her. And then there's also a sense that.
But that's human. Aren't we all victim and perpetrator?
And
I mean.
But that's why she's so great, because sometimes when you see a movie or read a novel, the writer or the director has come to rely on something like a less shaded character who is indisputably bad. And in the case of Lydia Tarr, I see her as very complex, and having only arrived in a historical moment where it's made possible that a woman could become a conductor, it doesn't feel like a fairy tale to me because of what she has to do to conjure confidence. Her own in herself and other people's in her feels very real and recognizable to me in a personal way, to be honest. But she comes of age in a moment when there's finally a space for her on the podium, and it's exactly the same moment when abuses of power are no longer tolerated. No?
Yes, I mean, the conductors who she has long admired, even Bernstein, who's considered to be one of the great all-inclusive conductors, he lived in a much more autocratic time.
He was a complicated guy.
Yeah, well, I mean, artists are complicated people, and they live in the grey areas. I mean, I think the interesting thing about conductors that you speak to, actors that you speak to, performers that you speak to, they say, I wasn't myself when I was doing that, because something channels through you. Yeah. But then what happens when that thing that channels through you destabilizes someone else? And I think that these are all the questions that the film asks, is that in the pursuit of greatness, what do we condone, and who supports those things that might destabilize other people? I mean, the making of art is impolite, because art is, at its base, a provocation, and artists are inconsistent. But then what the film also deals with, I think, which I find really interesting, is it's the systems that are created around it, and I think the quite nefarious element in the story that Todd has created is it's the board is running it, the shareholders are running it. So therefore, what happens to artistic expression? What happens to impulse? What happens to human connection when the board and the shareholders ultimately have the final say?
I feel like that's there, and it kind of relates to the final thing I want to bring up before we all go our merry way. For me, there's this use of sound design in the film where she hears the chimes of the medical equipment from upstairs, and she hears the hum of the refrigerator, and then that amazing scene where the metronome is tick-tocking away in the cabinet. And I thought it almost has a kind of Edgar Allan Poe quality of the return of the repressed, like the telltale heart. And it's as if Lydia herself is already in dialogue with things amiss in her and in the world of power that she's ascended. It's like she knows something is wrong, and it takes the form of sound. I don't know, this is a very interesting concept, and she's a little bit haunted, and the word haunted is used at the very beginning of the film, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really great moment that Todd's created, where you hear dun 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 dun, and she goes to the piano and goes dun 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 dun, bah. And so she turns an emergency alarm, which she's ignoring in her own personal life, into Mahler. And I think often when we're all obsessed by things, we can hear things, but we incorporate it into our own personal obsessions. And look, and definitely, I mean, I think that there's warning signal. I mean, there's a lot of elements in the film, and this is what I think is so brilliant about, and so judicious about the way Todd writes and directs, is that he puts all of these elements in there, but he doesn't make a big deal of them. The fact that she's turning 50, the fact that she is about to end this entire sweep of recordings that no other conductor has done with a single orchestra, and she's obsessed with legacy. And as an artist, when you get to the top of Mount Olympus, if you're a genuine artist, you have to blow it all up, because legacy will be the death of your artistry. So in the end, that's what I found really noble about the character. But unfortunately, by blowing that up, there's a lot of casualties, and I think that's the complicated thing about it.
Well, as a really extraordinary artist yourself, I think you are going to blow things up, and there won't be casualties, and I cannot wait to see what you do next, because I really think you're capable of doing anything. So can we give a round of applause for
Thank you for watching. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.